Good evening, everyone. We'll just wait one more minute here for the last few people to get in. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. We have a packed agenda for tonight. Thank you for joining us for Montgomery County DEP's second stream restoration webinar, part of the series that we're doing over the next couple of months. We're so glad you could join us tonight. We have a few quick administrative items. Please remember to stay muted during the session until you're called upon by Sadie, our moderator, if you raise your hand. You are able to change your session view in the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. For example, you can check or uncheck the side-by-side mode when there's screen sharing to make your screen larger or smaller. Please take a moment to make sure that your name is correct as it's shown in the Participants tab. If you just hover your mouse over your name in the Participants tab, it'll give you an option for more to rename if it's a different family name. This also will make it easier for Sadie to call on anyone with questions later on. If you do have a question, please raise your hand in Zoom using the buttons under the Reactions tab, which for me is at the very bottom of my screen. And Sadie will call on people with raised hands in the order that they're raised during the discussion period. We appreciated everyone's respectful questions and comments last time, and we look forward to a similar great discussion tonight. The chat feature is available for you to use at the bottom of your screen. If you just click on chat, this is great for a quick, simple question that you might have about what a word means or something you hear one of the speakers say. But if you have a longer question, we would encourage you to raise your hand and discuss that with us directly during the discussion period so we can make sure we get your question correct. The session, like the last session, will be recorded tonight and posted on the registration webpage, as well as DEP's YouTube webpage. You can just Google Montgomery County DEP YouTube, it'll pop right up. And I know this was useful for different people who weren't able to view the session that we had last time. So with that, I'm very happy to turn it over to Adriana Hutchberg, DEP's director, for some introductory remarks.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this second webinar session in the series. Everyone's here today because this is an issue that we care deeply about. I want to thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. And we're here to learn together. Stream restoration is a complex issue, and I encourage us not to try to oversimplify it, but rather to dive into the nuances in order to enhance our understanding of this topic. Adam Grant is a psychologist and a professor at the Wharton School, and he has some words of advice that I think are helpful here. He says that instead of treating polarizing issues like two sides of a coin, look at them through the many lenses of a prism. Seeing the shades of gray can make us more open. As we dive into the nuances of this issue together, I not only encourage, but expect that we do so using civil discourse. Another renowned social psychologist and professor, Kenneth Gergen, describes civil discourse as the language of dispassionate objectivity and suggests that it requires respect of its participants and neither diminishes their self-worth nor questions their good judgment. It avoids hostility or excessive persuasion, and it requires modesty and appreciation for others' perspectives. This is our intent for this webinar series as we learn from each other's experiences and perspectives and respectfully acknowledge them. We've heard from you at our listening session last November, and what you see in this evening's meeting, as well as in the forthcoming sessions, we've made adjustments to them based on the feedback that we got from you. And with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening, and we're very happy to once again have Sadie here opening up and moderating tonight's webinar. So turn it over to Sadie.
Thanks so much, Adriana, for those opening remarks. And thanks to Montgomery County for hosting the webinar series. And of course, thanks again to all of you for taking time to be here tonight. And thanks to our speakers who are joining us. So again, my role for tonight in the webinar series is to facilitate the discussion. As Christy said, we're starting off on this journey together and we're learning and hearing from you and kind of having an iterative process. So a little bit about where I work at the Chesapeake Bay Trust. We're a nonprofit organization. We focus on education, environmental education, engagement, restoration projects, and research. So you can find more about us on the website, but I'm just really happy to be here moderating the sessions and learning along with everyone. So the purpose of the first meeting was to hear from you all about stream restoration, what you thought about it, and it really helped us guide the webinar series, as Adriana said. In this meeting, we'll hear from first two speakers. They'll talk about 15 or 20 minutes about stream restoration, what it is, why and how we do it, and what research that can tell us and what research can tell us. Then Amy Stevens from Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection will talk about the county's project selection for about 10 minutes. And then finally, we'll round out this session with about 40 minutes to do a Q&A. So that's kind of a rough outline. I'll be keeping time. We'll be looking for raised hands during the Q&A, and we will be calling on your name. So when you raise your hand in Zoom, it kind of puts you to the top, and so we'll see you, and I can call on you. So as Christy said, just make sure to name yourself so it's easy to find. And so we'll be keeping an eye on the chat, so you can ask some clarifying questions, and the speakers might be able to get to them, but that's just another function we could use. So again, we value your time and look forward to hearing your comments. And I ask that we're all very respectful of each other, keeping our questions on topic and just learning together. Okay, with that, I'll start with the first speaker. Scott, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, and I'll do a brief introduction of Scott and his bio. So we're so happy to have Scott. He's the director of the environmental services for McCormick and Taylor. He oversees environmental design, permitting, planning, natural resource assessment efforts, and is a self-professed stream nerd. So he's the right person for this. He's been working for 20 years performing all aspects of environmental services, and he regularly enjoys stream assessment and restoration work and has led restoration efforts on some of the largest, most complicated, and award-winning restoration projects in the Mid-Atlantic. He served as the president of the Maryland Stream Restoration Association and is currently on the advisory committee for the Chesapeake Bay Trust Pool Monitoring Group, the Chesapeake Bay Program Scientific and Advisory Committee for Legacy Sediments, and the STAC Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee for Sustainable Streams. He's a member of the Chesapeake Bay Program Stream Health Work Group and a member of the Chesapeake Watershed Restoration Professionals. So lots of accolades, and take it away, Scott.
Thanks. I might fumble a little bit here at the beginning with getting the PowerPoint going. Hopefully it all works well, but thanks everybody for attending. And my talk's going to be kind of a nuts and bolts on stream restoration, why we do it, relative to all the suite of BMPs that are eligible to be selected and have been researched as part of MS4 program mitigation for impacts in other places and environmental stewardship projects. So I wanted to start with a little bit of background. Is the screen going? Okay, everyone can see the presentation.
Yep.
On who I am, I'm a dad. I am a dad in a blended family. So I have 5 kids, 5 teenagers running around my house. So hopefully they'll all be quiet during this time. I'm also an environmental scientist who've been doing this work for 25 years. And I specialized in aquatic ecology in my undergrad, and then really more of a focus on hydrology, hydraulics, and sediment transport in graduate school. I also volunteer a lot of my free time for stream health and stream work. I'm the treasurer of the Maryland chapter of the Trout Unlimited group. I love to fly fish, as you can tell from the picture. And one thing about me is that my father, growing up, was a surveyor. So I worked with him a lot and spent a lot of time laying out projects for development. And that really impacted me. I saw how areas that could go from a forest or a wetland one day could be a mall the next. And I had a tendency to be connected to math and science in school. And I was always told, you would be a good engineer, a good scientist. But I saw that type of work and recognized its importance, but I also wanted to make a difference to try to work with the landscape more. And that's what I've dedicated my professional life to. So the first part of my talk is about what we do as scientists, kind of learning and understanding the watersheds that we're working in and knowing the different components. And then how are we going to design any feature, whether it's stormwater or stream feature, to help kind of reverse any damage that has been caused by past activities. And the first thing to realize is a lot of what's done, for better or worse, is to manage the energy. This is something that our ancestors saw a long time ago when they built so many dams to help provide energy for development over time on our stream networks. And the easiest way to think about the stream energy that we're accounting for is that it's depth and velocity. So the deeper the water is, the more weight it has, the more it can push you around. And then the faster it's moving, the more damage that can occur as well. So generally, when we're trying to control the volume of water or the way that water is flowing, or create a condition that's restorative of a condition that has been impacted, we're looking at managing the depth and velocity of the water, either by holding it somewhere else or changing the shape of the structure that it's flowing through. And then the big part of that is, can it resist that energy? If you look at that graphic that's on the right, the areas 1, 2, and 3, area 1 is the headwaters, where streams are generally smaller. There's much less water that's coming through those areas. When it's further up in the drainage area, less water is consolidated, but that begins to create some erosion. Generally, those areas are faster, but shallower. And then as you transition, as you would go to like the Chesapeake Bay, there's a transitional area where larger channels are forming, stream channels can transport and store material, and then you get into a more coastal scenario where there's deposition. And then there's another component, and I have to credit the folks at Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. They loaned me this graphic, and I think I saw Matt on the call, where we also have to consider the ecosystem that exists in the stream channel that we're working in, or the watershed location that we're working in, and then how all the components of that watershed work together, and what can we do to preserve, protect, enhance, improve the functions as well as possible for each project. Then there's other parts to the project where the land use regulations, gets into property rights issues as well, where we have to be aware of what's going on as far as development and land use in each watershed and how that changed the watershed. And a common theme you're going to see through my presentation is that water needs space. And we have to come together collectively to decide where we're going to put it. One of the real benefits about the Chesapeake Bay region is there's been a long history of research, and one of the papers that's referenced frequently in this type of research was done from scientists at Johns Hopkins University and also University of Maryland, where they were evaluating how the watersheds that we all live in really were impacted greatly during colonization, when lots of trees were cleared and agricultural period deposited tremendous amounts of sediment in our floodplain valleys. This is really prevalent throughout the region. It's also supported by research, similarly around the mill dams by good scientists at Franklin Marshall, Dorothy Merritt's, and Bob Walters. So often the watersheds that we're looking at have been really heavily impacted historically, and the trees that we're seeing, the communities that we're seeing, are now growing on top of up to 9 meters of deposited sediments from past land use practices. So the other consideration we have to account for, we have to determine how much water is going to be delivered to a particular location. And we've all heard it. I'm sure everyone who signed it on this call is aware of how development impervious surface, the more that's added, the more runoff occurs, and evapotranspiration decreases, infiltration decreases, the more impervious surfaces we have. And what that does is implies more energy. So we talked about the depth and the velocity. It increases those values, and where something could have resisted before with a smaller rock or a tree or shrub that's holding the sediment of the stream shape, those things can't withstand the forces of the new energy. And that channel evolution model graphic shows kind of a common scenario for when more water and development pressure is applied, what happens to the stream channel where it down cuts, it widens, starts to stabilize, but at a much lower elevation. And then we also have the issue here where we've developed and incised and filled those valleys back up with historic land use practices from the agricultural period. And often then we see projects like these. These are often the ones that we look at. So when we're driving along, I've kind of conditioned myself, my kids now, when we're driving by and you see any sort of stream crossing, we look. And there are things that a lot of people never even look at, where it seems like it might be a forested area, but then you really give a close inspection. And some of these stream valleys have been really impacted by incision and erosion. And this is a common occurrence that we see in our practice as scientists and engineers. In fact, the picture that's on the far right corner was just off of 270, the project that was restored and stabilized a couple years ago. But those are 36-inch concrete pipes that are 8 feet long. So it can be a tremendous amount of force that we're dealing with, a tremendous amount of erosion for downstream systems. And I kind of went through a graphic as an example using the Stony Brook tributary to Rock Creek. You can see on the map, there's the Rockville Pike, Nicholson Lane, Strathmore. And I went back to 1951 and then went through a few historic aerial photographs to see how much developments occurred. So this is in 1970. You can see the development of north of Strathmore Avenue is nearly complete. They're starting to clear some of the area for White Flint Mall. The area around Nicholson Lane starting to develop. And then just along Rock Creek at the very bottom of the picture, developments occurring. And we want to remind everyone, around 1980 is when stormwater management became mandated. And then even in 1979, full development of the White Flint Mall was completed, all of which was before stormwater management. So it appears here you have over 50% of this watershed developed before the implementation of stormwater management legislation. 1993, even more development encroaching. And now we talked about those headwater areas that are really steep and have a tendency to be what you want to protect. They're kind of fragile. At this point in time, they're entirely developed. Going through 1998, more development south of Strathmore Avenue near the school. 2002, you see the development of the music center just off of Tuckerman Lane. And then this is where we are now. Interesting thing to note is below Strathmore Avenue is the only open channel in this watershed. Everything above it is a storm drain inside of a pipe. And that's one of the issues that we have when we're looking to do stormwater management. A lot of the work is already underground. So exposing that, rebuilding it, trying to find an area to store that is a difficult proposition, particularly the people who own the land aren't necessarily open to redevelopment that causes additional storage. And I included these tables on the left to show what these changes in development do to the hydrographs. And it's kind of hard to go through in a short presentation like this. But the point is that there's tremendous amounts of increase for the runoff associated with the development over time. And like as a point of comparison, to look at the 100-year storm, which is generally what FEMA regulates as a floodplain, there's 240 acre feet. So that's over 240 acres. There's 1 foot of depth of water generated for that storm event. Comparing that to 1951, that's 187. So that's 50 acre feet difference. Just as a point of evidence, the area of the White Flint Mall is 30 acres. So we would have to put 1.5 foot of water, a little bit more than that, on the whole area of White Flint Mall to control that. So it's a tremendous challenge for us to find that space. If we're going back to woods in good condition, which was the historical condition, we're looking at about 80 acre feet of water. And just to be able to visualize that, if we were to build a cylinder inside of the track at Georgetown Prep School, which you can see on the map, you'd need a tower 22 stories tall to be able to hold that much water. So we're dealing with a good amount of water as far as stormwater management goes and how that's changing the landscape. And that's not even addressing what future change is showing that we may have to deal with. This is a study that was done by the North Carolina Climate Institute, which shows that we're looking at probably 20% increases across the board for storm events moving forward due to climate change and other factors. So then we have this suite of ideas and suite of methods that are called best management practices. I shortened it just to BMPs without referencing it to save a little space here. But what we have to do is use this suite of choices and try to find locations in each watershed to place them. And it's a real difficult challenge. I think Montgomery County, compared to most, and in Maryland, they do a good job overall, but in Montgomery County, they do a tremendous job in siting projects and trying to find things that are beneficial to the community and the watersheds. And I think Amy will talk about that later. And stream restoration is just one of those. And I think every stream restoration professional I've ever talked to, and I've talked to a lot of them because that's mainly the people that I talk to, that they all feel like it's one of a suite. So we're not saying this is the only solution, but there's lots of different things that can be done. If you think back to those rain barrels, we're talking 470,000 rain barrels would have to be installed to manage that 80 acre feet of water. So it's a big challenge that we're facing. So what is stream restoration design? Like, what do I do? The first part of it is to meet with a client, hopefully with the community, to develop design goals. And we evaluate the property or the project area, the watershed, to determine those goals and constraints. And the constraints are the natural environment features, wetlands, forests, RTE species areas, which is rare, threatened, endangered species, and then infrastructure, property issues, things like that. And then we develop a new shape for the channel, which involves the cross-section. How much capacity do we want to have? Similar to a roadway, comparing it to a traffic analysis, we want to make sure that it can handle the flow that we think will come to that. The planform alignment is from looking downward on it. How much will that channel wiggle through the land? And then profile is the vertical component, is how much grade is being lost from the beginning to the end of that project. How much elevation change are we dealing with? And that's where the velocity comes into play. The next component is we test it. We use really detailed hydraulic models to show what that shape will look like, how much energy is going to be generated, what do we need to do to manage that. So this is the resiliency aspect of it. Then we develop features that are trying to mimic or utilize habitat considerations of those areas to form the new shape, make sure that they're resistant to those flows, and also providing habitat benefits to the greatest extent possible. And then the last part of it, after we know the shape of the channel, which areas we anticipate being wetter or having more energy, we will develop a planting plan that's very detailed. Montgomery County and the parks have really detailed plans, great guidance from certified arborists and landscape architects to help us develop planting plans that are native. Now, it's always a challenge when you're grading an area and trying to recreate a natural-like landscape, particularly when there's always an already invasive species present at the site. That's one of the challenges that we'll talk about a little bit later. So from that process, the things that we do relatively well and we're pretty confident in as far as the tools that have been developed and the technologies that's done. Erosion reduction, when we compare sites that would just be left alone to one that has stream restoration, there's generally tremendous success as far as reducing any erosion that occurs. The technology is really improved to improve our hydraulic modeling, floodplain identification, risk management, something engineers do really well. For those of you engineers who are listening, bioengineering is something that's dramatically improved over the years, which is using rooted cuttings that can establish quickly in areas that are riparian species. Habitat stability is also pretty critical. We've seen from lots of research, particularly from the University of Baltimore, that there are species that require, lots of fish species that require stability of bed sediments for periods of time so that the eggs that are deposited can remain in an oxygenated environment so that they can hatch and then become the fish that are swimming in the streams. Another part of it is mobilizing to meet goals. These are pretty significant mandates from the EPA that jurisdictions have to do a lot to implement projects. They have to do a watershed study, which helps to prioritize the projects to determine where the greatest needs are. They have to communicate with the public. They then have to hire people to design the projects or design them in-house, get them permitted, find people to construct them, manage the construction, and then monitor them. It's a tremendous amount of work, and the counties have done a tremendous amount of effort to help put together programs to deal with that system to complete these projects. Now, like any engineering practice or architecture practice, any sort of design, there's always things we can improve on, always things we can do better. One of the things is clearly communicating where the needs are in the watershed. Meetings like this, where we can talk about the decisions that have to be made, the techniques that are used, things like that. Often the collaboration with residents is part that the design has progressed pretty far down the road, and then you're reacting to plans. You may not really be used to reading plans, and then you're trying to figure out, well, where's my house and what's going on, and what is it going to look like out of my kitchen window where I used to see the tree, and this is where I would always see this cardinal. Those types of conversations need to occur earlier, and then matching the vision of the designer to the community is really important. Another thing that's difficult is the invasive species management, which takes constant upkeep and is really a battle that has to be waged by the whole community. And then the feedback loops. We do have to do projects relatively quickly. Natural systems take a long time to emerge. This is the part where my dog may bark, so apologize. Where we're looking at sites and required to monitor them for 10 years. And then the lessons that learn, we're bringing back to projects, but some of them may have been ahead of that learning curve. So what can we do to work together better? One of the issues I have often on projects where we'll have projects that are going through people's backyards, and there'll be 25 residents, and you go and speak with each one of them, and each one of them has a different vision of what the project will be. They have different goals, different desires, different communication styles, and they don't match. So then it makes it more difficult for us to come up with a solution where people aren't angry or people are getting all that they want. So working to come together as a community and then having the product and having that match the vision is really important. Also, we have to understand the cost of inaction. There's a tremendous amount of sediment and pollutants that have been deposited historically in these watersheds that are being pushed out. And climate change is causing the storm events to be more intense and more frequent. And we have to figure out ways, learning as we go. Unfortunately, we don't have all the answers right away, but we cannot do nothing. And lawsuits and things of that nature are helpful from a policy standpoint, but they don't prevent sediment from reaching the bay. And then kind of understanding how sites change over time, having some sort of tolerance for the historic perspective of how these watersheds are changing and what the interventions may look like 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road is also important things to consider. And then really looking at that space. So remember, again, the area of the White Flint Mall, 30 acres, and we would need roughly twice that to have stormwater management that's tremendously effective at buffering that. And that doesn't even account for climate change. So that's really difficult. Other thing that's really a struggle in the space is that be kind to one another. And I imagine if you're upset about stream projects, you're tired of hearing that in these presentations. But when people are yelling at each other, they can't really ever listen. And we have to do things. We're all on the same team. We're really trying to do the best. I didn't get into this industry to be a logger or demolish projects. When I see those statements, it hurts. And I've been, dedicating my life to doing the best I can for our watersheds. And it's good for us all to collaborate and be kind to one another. So I think that's an important thing for us to really recognize. We're not in this to take over the world. We're in this to do the best we can for the environment. So these are just some pictures of projects that we've worked on. I thank everybody for your time.
No, so thanks so much, Scott. You're right at 20 minutes, so really appreciate those thoughts. And I actually have not heard many engineers say be kind to each other in presentations, so I appreciate that. All right, so I didn't see any questions come in through the chat. So everybody keep thinking about that. Solange, go ahead and start sharing your screen, and I'll go ahead and introduce you to the group. All right, so Solange is a PhD Associate Research Professor at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, Chesapeake Bay Biological Laboratory. She's a watershed scientist with expertise in biogeochemistry and restoration ecology, and over 25 years conducting scientific research on various environmental topics related to the impacts of human activities on water resources. So Solange, go ahead and take it away. Thanks for being here.
Okay. First of all, thanks everybody for attending, and I'm really excited about sharing what I have learned in the past decade or so about stream restoration and from monitoring a bunch of streams in Maryland. As a scientist, I want to say also that the goal of monitoring is not to criticize restoration or anything like that. Is just to, as Scott said, the hope is to provide information that can help practitioners and others improve the practice. We are all learning together. I'd like to start by giving a little bit of a perspective of the importance of small streams, headwater streams. I am originally from Brazil, worked in the Amazon. I did my field work for my PhD in the Amazon basin, and I quickly learned that that streams are more important than anything. And so if we don't keep our streams healthy and functioning, everything goes downhill from there. So anyway, the point is that small streams are the foundation of our watersheds. They form the majority of the total stream length in watersheds. And in the United States, the estimate is that about 70% of stream length of any drainage network is composed of small streams. And so they're extremely important. And on top of that, they provide functions such as flow regulation. They regulate flow of water that comes from the watershed and goes downstream, and they filter sediments, nutrients, and contaminants from runoff before they're transported downstream, provide fish and wildlife habitat for breeding, feeding, and sheltering, and basically sustain the health of downstream rivers and bays. We know that very well here in the Chesapeake Bay area, but sometimes it's hard, it's easy to forget. At the same time that they are so important because they are at the interface between terrestrial and aquatic system, they are also very sensitive. Small streams are very sensitive to environmental changes at the local scale to global scale. At the local scale, we know that any kind of change, land use change in the drainage area can have severe impacts on streams. But then we also have we're facing, larger problems at the global scale, such as climate change, and because that we know that climate change is changing rainfall patterns and creating all kinds of other problems. And so with that, because of that, small streams are considered one of the most threatened ecosystems in the world. And this is very serious. Because when streams are degraded, not only they lose biodiversity, they look ugly and all that, but they lose very important functions. One of the most important functions that they lose when the streams are degraded is their capacity to retain nutrients that are transported. Usually in a healthy stream, nutrients are cycled. They're retained and released in a way that the retention time of transport is higher than when the stream is degraded. So when stream is degraded, the stream turns into a pipe that just conveys nutrients and pollutants downstream. Streams also, when they're degraded, they lose their capacity to balance sediment transport. So sometimes they become exporters of sediment a lot of times, and they also lose the capacity to control stream flow, and creating downstream problems such as high peak flows, a high discharge that can cause floods or erosions and destruction of roads, etc. Here in the Chesapeake Bay, we know that the loss of the functions that are important for maintaining water quality downstream is a major problem. And that's why here in the Chesapeake Bay area, especially, a major focus of stream restoration is to improve water quality and reduce pollutant loads, is to recover those functions that regulate water quality or improve water quality downstream. So it's, so we are in an area that is a little bit different from other parts of the US or the world, but in fact, actually, we are kind of at the forefront of what is happening everywhere now. So what we do here in terms of research is really revered and appreciated elsewhere in the world. So here in the Bay, but in general, restoration can be implemented, is implemented in headwater streams that are very tiny at the very top of the watershed. As Scott Lowe showed before, in headwaters that are gullies, basically, they can be restored in, along perennial channels that have water all year round. And in the coastal plain, there is a lot of restoration here in the Chesapeake Bay area that is done near the boundary of the estuary, the tidal boundary. And so, depending on where the restoration is implemented, designs vary, and there are, new designs coming up all the time, and people trying to come up with designs that can help restore one function or another. And so, as I said before, there are lots of stream restoration projects in Maryland, and so for the past 10 years or so, I have monitor many restored streams. And so here's a list of the streams that I have monitored personally, except for one of them here at the end, number 10. But so what I'm going to show you from now on, for the rest of the presentation, it is data from the monitoring of these streams. And so just briefly, I want to say that the streams that I monitored, they varied a lot in terms of their drainage area, the level of imperviousness, even though all of them were in urban or suburban catchments. They had different levels of imperviousness. About half of the streams were in lowland channels, but some of them were in, about half were in meaning in uplands at the top of the catchment. But a lot of the, most, 90% of the streams are in coastal plain area. There was one that I monitored was in the Piedmont that I know that is the case of, streams in Montgomery County. The restoration methods for the streams that I monitored varied a lot. I monitored a lot of streams that were restored with using a design that is called regenerative stream water conveyance system, and others that were streams that were transformed into what I call stream wetland complexes. But there was also, step pool conveyances, different designs. And the time of monitoring varied between about 1.5 years to 5 years or 6 years, depending on availability of funds. But in all cases, we monitored streams before and after restoration, or at least had a reference site or a control site to compare the restored reach with a degraded reach. And so the questions that, to monitor the streams, the main questions we asked were whether restoration increased the magnitude of low flows, because again, these are the streams that I monitored were, as I said, have a lot of storm water, or they are draining urbanized catchments. So we wanted to know if restoration was helping to reduce peak flows or reduce storm flows and increase low flows. We wanted to know if restoration was promoting nutrient uptake and reducing pollutant concentrations during base flow and storm flows, different hydrological conditions or flow conditions, high water, low water. We wanted to know if restoration was reducing erosion and sediment export, and and the overall loads of pollutants to downstream water. And so to answer those questions, we monitored streams during base flow conditions, normal water levels, and during a bunch of storms, on an event basis. So a lot of work put into it, a lot of samples collected and all that. And so here are some of the results. I mean, this is a kind of scientific presentation, but I'll try just to keep to the main points. I'm not going to talk about the data. So one of the questions is whether or not restoration was helping decrease peak flows and increase low flows, the magnitude of low flow in streams. And when we compared streams before restoration and post-restoration, we see that the restoration did increase the magnitude of low flows and decrease peak flows. And so, but here on the left are control or pre-restoration streams, and you can see that in blue, that storm flow accounted for most of the discharge, the annual discharge in these streams. But after restoration, there was a little bit of a decrease in the contribution, the relative contribution of storm flow discharge downstream. But I want to also highlight that the streams that are in red here or circled in red, they were positioned at the top of the watershed, and they always had more storm flow contribution than base flow. In terms of the water quality, here we have water quality during base flow and storm flow, and I'm just don't pay too much attention to the data, but the main point, what the take-home message from this picture is that during low flow conditions, restoration helped a little bit, but not always. So some of the pollutants did not decrease in concentrations, but during storm flow, restoration was very effective at reducing concentrations of pollutants. Okay, that's the take-home message. So in the final balance, what we see when I calculated loads for all the streams that I monitored, what we saw is that restoration did reduce pollutant loads. So you can see, for nitrogen, sediment, and phosphorus, there was variability though, but that was expected depending on the stream. I mean, they're all different. They have different characteristics, so that was expected. But there was a reduction, more consistent for total nitrogen than for other pollutants. But as I said, there was the streams are all different, and so in order to really compare them fairly, I normalized the loads by the catchment area, so we can see per area of stream drainage area how much restoration in decreased loads or yields. And what we saw is that the streams, the first 4 streams which were located at the top of the watershed, they performed more consistently better than the streams that were lowland channels. And so we were kind of curious then to know what might be potential factors creating such differences or controlling the performance of restoration. And what we found is that when we transform the load, the changes in load in percentage, how much load reduction in percent we observed in the restored streams, what we saw is that the small catchments, the small catchments performed better, streams that drained small drainage areas. So the performance or the capacity of restored streams to reduce loads decreased with the drainage area, the catchment area, especially for phosphorus and I know it was about the same. Sorry. The other thing that we saw was that the performance of the restoration increased as the concentration of pollutants in storm flow increased. And so here's where we saw especially that what I was thinking. This was something that we observed especially for sediment. So the higher the concentration of sediment in storm flow, the better the performance of the restoration. Okay, so anyway, so what we saw is that stream restoration did help improve water quality and reduced the loads of all these pollutants that are important to be reduced for the bay health and for downstream waters, rivers, and all that. But there is always this question, you know, so now that we know that, one question now that is coming up a lot is, are there unintended impacts of restoration to streams? And I think that this question is especially prevalent for restoration designs that are different or novel, or that sometimes transform streams a little bit more radically, I would say. And so this question, you know, about the unintended impacts, we try to answer this question regarding what we call the regenerative stream water conveyance systems. These are restoration projects that are implemented in perennial streams, not at the top of the watershed. These are perennial streams, usually lowland channels that are kind of, you know, they are widened and the stream flow is reduced and all that. And so we looked at, you know, to look at the potential unintended impacts on the stream health. We used indicators. We looked at indicators, three main indicators: dissolved oxygen concentrations, which is very important to support aquatic life. I also looked at stream metabolism because it's an indicator of stream health, just like for us people. If you go to the doctor and they look at, they'll do some tests or measure, some stuff on your blood stream, you can tell if you're in good health or not. It's the same thing with stream metabolism for, to look at stream health. And then we also used a fish index of biotic integrity. It's a well-known biological indicator of stream condition. And what we found is that in terms of the stream metabolism, and these are regenerative stream water conveyance system only, the streams that have been restored with this design. But what we have found is that the metabolism of the streams look like they haven't changed in comparison to what a healthy stream is known for. Characteristically, streams are heterotrophic, meaning that they have that production is smaller than respiration. So there's more respiration of organic matter than production. So nothing has changed with restoration, which is good. However, what we have seen is that in these restored streams, the RSCs, they were concerning low levels of dissolved oxygen in the summer, but we also saw in other warmer months. So meaning that maybe what this indicates is that maybe the quality of the organic matter that is being utilized by organisms, bacteria and other in the restored streams is different. It's like more labile, and so that creates a wide variation in concentrations of of dissolved oxygen, and that can have consequence to biota. And when we look at the fish index of biotic integrity, we compared high quality streams with degraded and then restored streams, and we see that restored streams do not perform much better in terms of fish health than degraded streams. And maybe one of the reasons, there are probably many reasons, one of the reasons is this kind of variation in levels of oxygen. So in conclusion, if we now, somebody asked me, is restoration effective in improving water quality and reducing polluted loads, I can say yes, they are effective. There is variability, but they are effective, and but they are effectively, especially when they have more storm flow than base flow, because the restoration, at least the restored streams that I have monitored, the restoration works much better at reducing concentrations of pollutants in storm flow than base flow. But we have also learned that restored streams that have been restored with this with approaches that, you know, the stream is widened and the stream flow is reduced drastically, and then there is high incidence of sunlight, these streams tend to become anoxic in warmer months. And anoxic meaning no oxygen or low oxygen, and that has potential negative implications to biota. And so I would say, at least in this case, eventually probably these streams, you know, the riparian forest will grow and shade the channels, which would probably be improve the condition of the streams. So I just want to finish here by saying in the end that saying that the goal of restoration is to move a degraded ecosystem to a trajectory of recovery informed by a reference system. So we want to make the stream as close as possible to a pristine stream. However, we need to consider local and global environmental changes. And so because of that, we know that sometimes, as Scott said before, with, you know, so much land use change and urbanization and other stressors in the watershed at the local scale and now climate change, we need to ask the question if it is even possible to restore fully streams, and that's it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Solange. Ken, I do see you have your hand raised, so you want to ask a question?
Yes. Yeah, thanks, Solange. Very good presentation. You partially answered my question about the biological upgrade with the BB indicator. Why did you not measure the BIBI, the benthic macroinvertebrates, and does it make any difference? I mean, is the fish versus the benthic macroinvertebrate indicators, 6 to 1/2 dozen of another?
Well, the project that I had we're just looking at fish, but there are studies. Actually, the BATRAS has funded studies looking at macroinvertebrates, and I think that they haven't seen a biological uplift in the case of macroinvertebrates, and the reasons maybe are different. But it's going to be a very complex issue. I mean, this biological uplift that we expect, I don't know if it's realistic, really. And there are, the reasons are several. So, but we're learning, and hopefully we'll improve things to improve the health of streams as an ecosystem in general. That's what we all want, but we have to be realistic too. So.
Well, thanks so much, Solange. And let's go ahead and transition to Amy. And thanks, Ken, for the question, to Amy's presentation. So Amy, if you want to pull up your slides. So Amy Stevens is with the Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection. She's the manager of the Planning and Outreach and Monitoring section in the Watershed Restoration Division. She's worked at the Department of Environmental Protection for 18 years. And in her current role, she's responsible for overseeing the coordination of the county's municipal separate storm sewer system, MS4 permit, total maximum daily load implementation planning, watershed planning, outreach and engagement, and many other things. Amy began working at Montgomery County in 2003 in the stormwater inspection and maintenance section. And after several years as the program manager, she was promoted to manager of the section. And for 9 years, she's been responsible for ensuring the stormwater management facilities and BMPs that Scott told us what those were earlier in the county were inspected and maintained. So before working at Montgomery County, she worked for Tetra Tech for 3 years, where she provided the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System regulatory support for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Water. She has a BS in biology from University of North Carolina at Wilmington, and a Master of Science in Environmental Science and Master of Public Affairs from Indiana University School of Public and Environmental Affairs. So I don't want to cut that short, Amy, so take it away.
Great. Thank you very much, Sadie. Hello and good evening, everybody. So I'm going to try to keep my presentation short. I'm really here to talk to you a little bit about how we select projects. And I need this to move forward. Well, having technical difficulty moving my, there we go, presentation forward. Okay, so let me get into this. really what I'm going to talk about, like I said, is how do we select these stream restoration projects? We heard a little bit about, what goes into the design, what's the science behind some of it, but now really what goes into what Montgomery County is doing. Our restoration program primary driver is our MS4 permit. It has been our primary driver since 2001 when we received our first restoration goal that was in our MS4 permit. Planning and data collection is an ongoing process for us. We're doing it every year, and we're even now beginning to plan for our next permit, the one that comes after this one that we were just issued in November. Once we receive the permit, the first year is spent on us selecting our projects to meet our restoration goal. And that's where we are today. But the years 2 through 5 are for implementation, design, and construction, because most projects take up to 4 years to design and construct. So as I mentioned, planning is an ongoing process for us, and there are many things that go into how and why we select a particular project. We have tools and assessment information that we use to identify our potential opportunities. And once we've selected a potential opportunity, we conduct a field visit to see the current condition of the streams or the BMP that we're looking to retrofit. We scope out limits of projects. We need to understand our utilities, the property ownership, access. There's a number of factors that have to be evaluated before we can even move a project forward. So our watershed assessments, it's an important tool for us because it helps us understand information about our watershed. It uses baseline assessment measures like land use, impervious area, forest cover, water quality monitoring data to better understand our watershed, the current conditions in our watershed, as well as areas where we might have some data gaps. We use the watershed assessment data to help us identify stream restoration opportunities, as well as opportunities for green infrastructure for a 2010 permit, as well as for projects that we've more recently completed in 2019 and 2020. But in 2022, this year, actually, we're getting a new watershed assessment process. We're going to adapt it a bit. We're looking to change it a little bit. Before, we used to do watershed assessments for an entire watershed like the Anacostia. Now we're really going to try to do an entire county-wide assessment, and we're going to update that every 5 years. And then this will allow us to identify specific smaller tributaries where we can actually do a more detailed assessment to help us identify potential project locations. This process will seek public input, so I'm hoping many of you on our webinar today will get involved. And these new assessments that we're doing now are going to help us for our next permit, the one that we're going to get 5 years from now. So, but right now for our current permit, the one that we have, that was issued to us in November, we're using the stream restoration suitability maps to help us begin the process to identify our project selection. We developed 2 types of models, and they resulted in maps. One is for stream restoration, the other one is for stormwater management or BMP selection. Right now, today, I'm just going to focus on the model and then that helps us with stream restoration. But if there's also more information on our website about our stormwater BMP suitability map. One very important driver for identifying our stream restoration sites is locating restoration in areas where there is upland treatment. And this is the actual key data layer that is in our stream restoration map that is not in our stormwater BMP map, and that is this treated drainage area, this net IA percentage that you see at the bottom of the last data input on this slide. We also want to identify suitable areas that have the potential for improving biology and ecosystem function, because the site is located near another stream with a source population of critters that are more sensitive to urbanization. So we included this criterion because of emerging new science about source populations. So you can see those are also part of the data layers that are part of these suitability models. We also want to locate our stream restoration projects in smaller drainage areas with existing upland stormwater management, mitigate the effects of high flows. So we're limiting the drainage areas to less than 1,000 acres. This was included in our model because of the emerging new science that we had been hearing from Solange, as well as from our own past experience, where we know that when we put projects in smaller streams, they tend to be more stable than larger streams. We really want to be working in our tributaries, our smaller streams, and not in the main stem streams. So one thing I want to note that if we are using the stream restoration suitability tool to identify stream restoration, we would not be using to identify BMPs because of the inputs are different. And one of the primary reasons is where we try to identify locations for BMPs is areas where we have uncontrolled or under controlled stormwater runoff. That is not part of an input in here because the opposite is the case for stream restoration. We're looking for areas with controls and stormwater BMPs. So here's the map that is produced by the model. This map is available online, and I've asked somebody to put the link in the chat at some point so that you guys can go look at it. It is interactive. You can plug in an address, and you can look in the county to see where we've determined if a site has potential for stream restoration. The model produced a range of scores, which we use to prioritize areas. The red and orange is high suitability. The yellow is a medium, and the blue is low suitability. So we are prioritizing areas that fall within the high to medium prioritization. Also to note, there are areas on the map that are black. The county doesn't have jurisdiction to do stream restoration all over the entire county. So the areas in black are not within our MS4 jurisdiction, and they're areas where we won't be doing stream restoration. Once an area is identified as a potential opportunity, really the next step begins to do a lot more analysis. This is just a screening tool that we're using. So once we have identified an area, we're then going to actually go out in the field to look at the current condition of the stream, to understand what's going on out there, how much erosion we're seeing, where would be the limits of the project, if there's potential access concerns, impacts to vegetation, utilities. There's a number of things that we're going to be looking for. That is really the next step that we have to evaluate to see if it's suitable for a project that then moves into design. So community input and co-benefits are really key. Our primary driver is our MS4 restoration goal. We know our watershed assessments and our suitability models help us identify opportunities. But what we also are trying to identify locations that where we have some community input. We maintain a database of erosion complaints that we use for watershed assessments. And as we begin to understand what could be a potential project that would help us meet our MS4 goals, then we begin to look at the possible other co-benefits that could exist that could help with our project and make it a more successful project, like looking at infrastructure protection or private property protection. We also want to make sure that we're working in our frontline communities. This is very important to us, and we have developed another tool to help us with our site selection for both stream restoration and our stormwater BMPs. This tool is used in conjunction and helps us identify areas of the county with where there are areas of the county with people of color and low income, where we want to be able to target some of our restoration work. And this picture that you see here is of Grosvenor project, which is a current project that we have in design. And this one was selected because of the amount of erosion and instability in the stream, but also because the community and local leaders requested the project. So I'm going to wrap this up now so we can get on to our questions and discussion. But one thing I want to go back to really where we are right now and what we're doing. Our permit was issued in November, and before then, we've been continuing to implement restoration projects, but we're really ramping up at this point because we have to meet our 5-year goal. We have until November 2026. So we will be designing and constructing both stormwater BMPs, including green infrastructure, as well as stream restoration projects. We are working very closely with our MNC-PPC Parks partners, as they will be designing and installing several stream restoration projects in coordination with us. We use our suitability model, our watershed assessments, as well as criteria and recommendations from parks to help identify sites. We did conducted field visits with them, and that helped us come up with a short list of potential projects. We're also going to be using contracts to solicit work for stream restoration, as well as stormwater BMPs. One type of contract is a full delivery type for a project. The contractors will submit proposals to us, and these proposals can include anything from alternative BMPs to green infrastructure, to stormwater BMPs, to stream restoration. We're also going to be issuing an invitation for bids for specific projects. DEP staff are currently working on selecting specific projects. These are for stormwater BMPs and green infrastructure. We use our suitability model for our BMP stormwater suitability to identify sites where there is uncontrolled and outdated stormwater treatment, as well as our equity map. We're currently conducting site visits to determine feasibilities before we put those specific projects into invitations for bids. So I want to close out by saying every site is different, every project design and the project constraints are unique to that project. We use tools and assessments to identify potential. We evaluate site specifics. We really are looking for information on existing conditions, habitats, drainage, utilities, access, property ownership, co-benefits. We solicit and seek community input. All of this goes into our projects. Our staff at DEP are very knowledgeable about the county. We are all professionals who have dedicated our time and our career to making improvements in water quality. But what we recognize and understand that the science and art of restoration continues to evolve. And we at DEP continue to remain eager to learn. We're trying to adapt and modify as fast as our planning and implementation process allows us. But as I've said, it takes years before we actually even begin a project to plan and find projects. And so our process is time consuming and long. But I wanted to thank you all for taking the time to listen to me. I'm going to turn this back over to Sadie. We're going to start our question and discussion period.
Great. Thanks so much, Amy. I really appreciate all the speakers telling us what stream restoration is, what the recent research is, and the county's project citing. So if you have a question now, go ahead and raise your hand, and I've got my participant list pulled up and we'll be able to see you, and it'll pull to the top. And there were a couple of questions in the chat. I know, Scott, you might have wanted to build on to Solange's answer to Ken. So if you want to do that, feel free.
Sure. Yeah. The species-specific design is pretty difficult and challenging, particularly for benthic macroinvertebrates. You know, the research that's available for us to utilize in the design process is limited primarily to fish, and a lot of it's limited to game fish, where we know enough about their life histories and the impacts to them from a water quality standpoint. So like what toxicity elements and things like that we would need to look out for in the watershed, some of which cannot be addressed by stream restoration. But that is a challenge, particularly on the bug side, because there's not a lot of good research on macroinvertebrate health and life cycles that allow us to add in specific design criteria for that in any BMP that we pick, not just in stream restoration. So that's something where I would really love to see more research and have that aided. And certainly there's a lot of evidence that shows that that is limited by impervious surface. I don't want to be one of those negative designers who says once a watershed reaches 10% or 15% impervious, then there's no chance of biologic recovery. But it's definitely something that as an industry, we want to, and I hate using that word industry because we're not, but as an organized group of practitioners, we really want to improve that aspect of BMP design and specifically for stream restoration.
Thanks a lot, Scott. And I know we have a couple of questions in the chat, but David, I see you have your hand raised, so go ahead and come off mute and ask one of the speakers your question.
Is it off now? Very
Yep.
good, thank you. So I think I followed the last answer, and I understand how we may have limited information in terms of technical substantiation, in terms of what we need to do to design for biological integrity and quantifying before and after. But DEP has always been big on collecting bug data. And I don't know how widespread that is throughout the county, but I know there's a lot of information on Paint Branch where I'm most familiar. So my question is, while we don't have the data to do design studies quantitatively relative to biology, what do we have in terms of data that biological data that may be collected before a restoration, and then follow up for years thereafter to see how the biology comes back over time?
Great, thank you, David. Ken, do you want to go ahead and try to answer that?
Sure, I can at least get it started. So we do have data that we've collected over the last 20 plus years, 25 years or so. Many of those sites are related to restoration. We have not seen biological uplift when it comes to the benthic community. This is it's something we've looked at and we continue to look at. We have seen some biological shifts as related to the fish communities surrounding the restorations. Typically, we see increases in numbers and diversity. We don't always see increases in the sensitivity of the fish, but typically it's enough to make our IBIs bump a little bit. We have countywide data, and what I would say from a countywide perspective, because these restorations don't happen in a vacuum, right? So they have upstream impacts and downstream impacts. Fish and bugs don't stay in one place. Is that we have seen some of the poorest areas of the county get a lot better. At the same time, not due to the restorations, we have seen some of the worst areas or some of the best areas of the county get a little bit worse. So the county is kind of homogenized over time. Some of that is probably due to our stormwater management and restoration. Some of it is probably due to climate change, some of the tailing off we see of our excellent streams. But as a long-term practice, we really haven't seen that benthic uplift that that was asked about.
Solange, Scott, anything else to add to that? Thank you, Ken.
Another good resource that we utilize, and Montgomery County has a tremendous amount of data that's been collected, more than most. Another good resource is the Maryland Biological Stream Survey that you're probably aware of. And they have sentinel sites that have been monitored for over 25 years that are randomly selected through watersheds. Most of the one of the benefits of biological monitoring is it's very easy to collect, and they're from like a cost and management standpoint, and they also have good tolerance value research that's been done as far as when they can live in a certain watershed. But that's really what it's limited to, and it's really been focused on land use changes as far as most of the historical evaluations for benthic populations. And I think that's one of the things that I spend a lot of time scouring and looking for, is finding specific information. So that's one of the difficulties with stream restoration, is we're working on a site that may be a few thousand feet long when we're trying to develop new features that match the habitat preferences while balancing the energy and the scale of the macroinvertebrate habitat is an individual rock. And there's not a tremendous amount of research, and a lot of the water quality elements aren't impacted by the shape of the channel as much. There's certainly elements associated with biological uptake and the spiraling that Solange mentioned before, Dr. Filosa, and then shading and tree canopy is an issue, but also whatever pollutants are entering the system from the watershed as well.
May I add one thing? I did a scientific literature review a few years ago about to look at the recovery of macroinvertebrates in streams based on according to restoration of riparian buffers actually. And in the the conclusion was that a lot of the recovery of macroinvertebrates communities was also associated with the conditions of streams of the upstream of the restoration. So basically, I mean, if if the headwaters are totally degraded, that's also something that is going to influence the biological recovery. And as as Scott said before, a lot of restoration is done just in stream reaches, but there is a lot that goes on. I mean, these stream reaches are connected to the rest of the watershed, but and the top of the stream, the very top of the headwater is very important. We need to keep that in mind. Ideally, we should restore entire streams.
Great, thanks for that. I don't see any hands, so I'm going to go to a couple of the chat questions. I know there were some answers to chat questions there. So Kit is asking if the concern about anoxic conditions when you remove trees will lead to requirements that stream restorations limit tree removal as part of the process. So I'll throw that out to the panelists.
So the question is about removing trees.
Yeah, if it will lead to, yeah, good.
Yeah, well, the thing is that, what at least from the work that I have done and in all the literature that I have read, the limiting factors to making streams produce a lot of algae and become eutrophic and all that is the limiting factors for streams for primary production are nutrients. So these streams that are degraded have a lot of nutrients, so they can produce a lot of algae. Now, another limiting factor is light, and so if you already have nutrients, but then you add the light incidence, you can create a problem. And so I think in some, the thing is that there are trade-offs. I mean, if you're like creating floodplain and all that, it may compensate. But the truth is that I think that the tree buffers, they do protect streams from high temperatures and from, having too much primary production and production of very labile organic matter. So I don't know if I answered the question.
I'd like to add something. Oh, sorry, Amy, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
I guess I was just going to say there's an important thing to understand about the RSC concept that Solange was talking about too, is that for the most part, they're in a transition area. They're a low-lying stream, but it's not entirely flat. They're generally steeper, where they're transitioning from some sort of pipe or higher stream down to the coastal boundary. And in that transition, they have to manage the slope and the energy, which is partly why they can retain the water and show the benefit that Solange showed as far as retention of storm flows in a series of steps. So the water is pulled and then flows over a weir to the next pool. And that pulling, combined with the fact that there are some tree removal adjacent to the grading, allows the water to sit still a little bit longer. So I imagine that probably contributes a little bit, and it's part of the trade-off, where the design strategy itself, which is trying to promote infiltration and trying to promote storage until the tree canopy recovers, because of it stilling the water as it moves and managing the energy, that may have an impact on the flowing water. Generally is going to mix a little better and potentially have higher dissolved oxygen, unless I'm completely incorrect, Solange, but I imagine that it's not a stream as you would picture like a mountain brook.
It's interesting because one of the sites that I monitored was Will Eleanor, which is one of those lowland channels, and it has been widened and everything, It has the, the slowing, the slow flow and all that, the impounding of water. And, but then the canopy came back. And in that system, we don't see these crashes of oxygen. So it's interesting, even though the channel has been totally modified, the system seems to be functioning well in terms of, the metabolism and all that. And so I think that, the tree cover is a big deal. But, as you said before, it takes time for a lot of this stuff to come back to a channel. And in the case of Will Eleanor, I've been monitoring or looking at that stream for, many years, and you can see how nice and healthy the riparian buffer now look.
Well, thanks for those comments. And that's looking ahead to our next topic, which will focus on trees. Ken, I see you have your hand raised. Question for the panelists.
Yeah, thanks. Scott, a question for you. What can you talk about the downsides of stream restoration, especially compared to the upland stormwater control techniques, and also can you touch on the cost difference? I've been told that the upland practices on I guess you can say on a per acre basis is much more expensive. And I would like to find out if that has been the experience with your company and your industry.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I have to say it depends, although I hate to say it. I'll start with the cost one and then go to the downside. The information that I've been privy to relative to the practices have been primarily in Maryland. So that will be the reference that I speak from. I largely believe that stream restoration is from the metrics that are used for the MS4 permitting is one of the more cost-effective best management practices for achieving nutrient reduction and impervious area treatment. The difficulty with the cost benefit of some of the environmental site design or the infiltration-based types of features is they're trying to fit them in small spaces. And the built environment in communities, there's a lot of people who are very much opposed to having them built in their yards or concerned about the maintenance of replacing media or filter material, things like that. They are very effective from a water quality standpoint, but they're small. So they're treating smaller areas. And in that way, they just pale in comparison from a cost to mobilize, get the material, and build them. Now, like I said before, they're effective, and there needs to be some sort of combination of BMPs so that you're filtering water and hopefully storing some. I think that's one of the issues with the water quality elements is that they focus on the really short duration first flush elements of the storm, and we're running into the resiliency issues where the storm events are becoming more and more intense. So I imagine there will be some sort of shift in the regulatory environment and legislation associated with managing quantity again, because it's a real critical issue for public safety as well as continued erosion. So as far as the downsides of stream restoration, it is like any BMP that you're kind of limited to the materials that you can work with. So there's a real trend to try to use as much on-site as material as possible from a sustainability practice standpoint, which is really good. That helps keep costs down and have the channels reworked in a way where grading is balanced and materials are kept on site. But you're limited to materials that are broadly used for all construction practices. So the stone, you're finding niche pieces of stone that would have been used for larger applications like large walls or transportation industry. So the suppliers of the materials have to supply all the construction industry, and the time it's taken to find a niche suppliers of those materials creates issues where you're using materials that aren't exactly what you would want. So that is one downside. The other downside is you need space. And there's a hard conversation that has to be had with a lot of people who have property that's adjacent to the stream valleys, where they have a particular sense of what it should look like and what it should be and what they value, and they want to protect that, which is completely understandable. It's not my backyard that this work's going to be done. And oddly enough, I do have a project that's going on close to my backyard, which I'm concerned about and checking in on too. But I think that having an understanding of the space element and what are we going to do relative to the grading operation that could widen it out, which would really allow for more benefits to downstream waters where we're making a wider floodplain. The studies show that the wider the floodplain is, the greater it accesses, the more it treats the nutrients more often than not. And the values, there was just a paper that I saw today from Paul Mayer that showed that. So it's repeated that is a really critical element. And historically, these stream valleys had a lot of wetland meadow complexes, particularly in the headwaters. And they had a lot of area to access. So finding the space to do it and then fitting it within how the community wants that park system to be. And that's the other thing. They haven't been able to develop them because of the proximity to the streams and protecting the resources. And all the other areas are developed. So finding other areas to put BMPs is a huge challenge. So I think that's a drawback, is sometimes the materials that you have to use cause decisions, like from geometric decisions that can create problems. Trying to save too many trees is something that we really try to do, but then you save a tree and it falls down. It was impacted or it was endangered by some activity. Things like that are also a challenge where you try everything you can to have that dual benefit, and it causes an unintended consequence down the road. So I think those are just all the things. I'm talking too much.
Thanks for that comment, Scott. And we will go a little bit over just to make sure we get to folks' questions. Phil, did you want to add anything here? Oh, saw your camera come on. All right, Amy, Solange, anything else for that question? Frank?
No.
Okay, good. Well, I don't see any hand raised. A couple of questions and comments from the chat. Lisa asked, what can the people that live in Montgomery County do to support some of these monitoring efforts? So thoughts on that?
So I really like this question, Lisa. I think it would be, having community science is really critical. I'd love to find a way to incorporate. I think it's a great idea. Certainly can help. I don't know. I'll leave it up to others to add. Ken, go ahead.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
So Lisa, there are a number of programs that aren't directly related to restoration, although some of them are. Folks collect benthic macroinvertebrates with Audubon Naturalist Society. That is a fantastic program. Lots of great education opportunities, and you're collecting very meaningful data. Isaac Walton League is doing a great job watching salt, because the winter salt issue, while not directly related to this, is absolutely tied to the depression of our benthics and fish across the county. And then there are a handful of bacteria monitoring programs through citizen science, which are fantastic and providing very useful information to us about where we have some hot spots and issues with bacteria. So I really love that question too, and I really appreciate it.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. One other question just from the chat, not seeing any hands raised, was an earlier one from Kit for you, Amy. Can we require or nearly require that any stream restoration include upland environmental site designs, so limit the size and tree removal of stream restorations?
So thanks, Kit, for the question. What we are trying to do is focus our stream restoration in areas where there's already upland BMP treatment. That's really one of our key design, key criteria. Incorporating BMPs, where we've had past stream restoration projects is also another key component to identifying locations for potential projects. So yes, I think that is something that absolutely we want to try to address. Anyone else also want to chime in, feel free. on DEP, if you'd like to add to that. If not, I think we're all on the same page with that idea.
Great, thanks very much. Just one other question you all didn't see that was private message to me is for you, Solange. How successful or not successful do you think the stream restoration of Paint Branch on your University of Maryland campus in College Park has been? From Alexis.
Well, I know that that there is monitoring going on there, before and after restoration. And I think it's the most comprehensive monitoring ever done. And from what I understand, it looks like, at least in terms of water quality, it's, the restoration is successful. But I haven't seen the results yet. It's just that a colleague of mine is monitoring, so sometimes I get updates. So, but it's looking good so far.
Well, thanks for that, Solange. I wanted to say that I know we went a little bit over, and that's my fault as the moderator. So thank you guys for hanging in there. But thanks to everybody for asking your questions. I think we got to all of them. And folks on the panel, let me know if we missed any. But really appreciate you guys being here and listening to the thoughts and comments. I really loved how Scott opened with what is stream restoration. And Scott, thank you for your openness in embracing this and really putting out your ideas and food for thought for what we might do better. And Solange, the research that you showed really leading into what Amy showed us about project site selection and some of the things the county is doing and using some of the research you showed to do things better that we're all trying to do. So like what Scott said, we're all on the same team trying to do meet the same objectives. So I really appreciated that. So just want to thank you guys, all the panelists, for your time today and really sharing your points with us and giving us a lot of food for thought. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amy to kind of close this out.
Great, thank you so much, Sadie. And first of all, thank you to everybody who joined us today. Last count, we had almost close to 100 people join. That might have changed a little bit as the time's gone on, but it's great to see so many interested in learning and being part of this discussion. So thank you. Thank you for those who chose to speak up and ask the questions or put their questions in the chat. That's really what we're here for. We're excited to try to answer them, and we will continue to try. Solange and Scott and Sadie, oh, great big thank you from all of us at DEP for all of your time to come and join us tonight to present, excuse me, and be a part of this conversation. So I really loved the presentations, and like I said, I've enjoyed having everybody here. I want to let you know that on February 16th, we're going to have our next webinar, and this session is actually going to focus on vegetation and trees, and specifically and invasive species, and even climate change, we're hoping. And so I think this conversation will just continue there. I think we'll get into a lot more depth into some of the comments and questions that came up tonight on those issues. So you can see the links that are up here. Take a look at our website, register for that. We're actually going to extend that time period from 6 to 2 hours because, one, we have a lot of people we'd like to bring in and talk, but we also think that there will be hopefully a lot more dialogue and we won't be so rushed. But we wanted to let you all know in advance, and be, we want to be cognizant of your time. So, please register for that. Please join us. It's going to be in about a month from now. We will have tonight. It's going to be recorded. And it will be available on our YouTube channel. You can see the link there. Just put in YouTube, Montgomery County in DEP, and you should be able to find it. So I wish you all a great night. Stay warm. It's pretty frigid out there still. And looking forward to talking to everybody in February. Take care.